I'm in a simulation that I get to say this. Marianne Williamson, welcome to I Just Have to Say with Laura Max.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I might have reached out to Marianne only a few days ago to ask her to be a guest on this show, but anyone who has known me for a long time knows that I have been prepping for this interview for at least a decade and a half. In 2012, my byline for an online magazine I was writing for read, Laura Max is a lover of big shoes, dark chocolate, and Marianne Williamson.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you.
It's true. Beginning her career known as the spiritual advisor to Oprah Winfrey, Marianne is the author of 16 books, 4 of which became #1 New York Times bestsellers. Her iconic quote from mega bestseller A Return to Love, which starts, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure," has become an anthem for a new generation of spiritual seekers. Count me as one of them, because that also saved me from my very own little nervous breakdown at age 20 when I read it and understood for the first time that it was my light, not my darkness, that frightened me most. Most recently, Marianne has brought her visionary ideals to the political stage, running not 1, but 2 presidential campaigns in the past 4 years. Before we dive into your most recent book, Marianne, I would be remiss if I didn't do what most major news networks in the US have summoned you for in the past week and ask you about your thoughts on the election results. You said recently that you wished you could put your arms around the millions of people who are distraught or deeply sad right now and tell them that it's going to be okay. I'm sitting there on November 5th, Marianne, when the election results are rolling in, and all I'm thinking about is the friends that I have that I know felt like it wasn't going to be okay, and I wanted to hug them too, but I had something they didn't, and that was a total lack of surprise. Why, as you've said recently, and I agree with you, is the Democratic Party no longer seen by a majority of Americans as the party of the working people in the U.S.?
Well, the answer to that last question is because the Democratic Party, in too many ways, has compromised its own values. I think the most important thing, first of all, is that we align ourselves with our own civic duty, and that is to respect an election, respect a democratic election. I remember 4 years ago when so many supporters of Donald Trump, even to this day, would not accept the results of a democratic election. I think it's our duty to do that. So my first thing I want to say is to those of you who voted for Trump, congratulations, you won this time. For those of you who did not vote for Donald Trump, there are some very serious fears in the air. This is not just another lost election. There are deep concerns about some of the things that the president has said that do tip over into authoritarian or dictatorial policies should he execute them. Now, we all have to take a deep breath and know that sometimes people say things in campaigns. Yes, we told each other, and we were right, take him seriously. But at the same time, he is the president-elect now, and we'll see what happens. For those of you who are not supporters of the president-elect, the job now is to mount what is called a loyal opposition. And that's what happens in a free society. That's, nobody owes it to anyone to agree with them, including the president of the United States. Now, when I was running, I'm sorry to say that I predicted this result. I have felt that the Democratic Party's way to defeat Donald Trump this year was to mount a genuinely progressive campaign, one that stood on fundamentally addressing the economic despair of 70% of the American people through such things as an economic Bill of Rights, through such things as universal health care, through such things as tuition-free college and tech school, subsidized childcare, a Department of Peace, and so forth. We have to recognize, and this goes back to your last question, why the Democratic Party sought to silence a campaign that was saying something like that, suppressed the primary so that only their chosen candidate could, in effect, run. And so I think a lot of people now realize that many of the narratives spun by the DNC, suggesting they knew what they were doing, suppressing democracy this time, because after all, democracy is threatened, which it, in fact, I believe in many ways was. I think a lot of people are dealing with the shock, not only of the election result, but of realizations about the Democratic Party, how it operates now, and how it absolutely needs to change, or our real progressive populist, left-wing populist yearnings will go elsewhere, and that could even cause more chaos than is happening now.
You quoted Martin Luther King this morning, who said, "You have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt." I get on Facebook the day after the election and it's 2016 all over again. I have people in my feed requesting that they be unfriended by anyone who voted for Trump, keyboard matches in the comments, people hashtag not my president all over the place. This is coming from people in a political party that had to withstand 4 years of the opposition claiming that Biden wasn't a fairly elected president. Why do we do this? And what should we be doing instead? What type of behavior should the political opposition be embodying at this point if they're disappointed in the election results?
Well, thank you for mentioning it, Laura, because it's a huge issue. This is not just about what we do at this point. It's about who we are at this point. And that is core to any kind of mounting a nonviolent political force field, purification of your own heart. This did not just start. This has been true for a long time, that the same kind of smug, self-righteous arrogance that so many of us detest on the right has been equally present on the left. I think it's so important that we remember nobody owes it to you to agree with you. And nobody has a monopoly on truth. I believe, and I think every Democrat might look at this, the Democratic Party created a void. Over the last year and a half, I was out there going, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about this. There was such an effort to suppress my voice. And people went along with this. People went along in this codependent stupor with the Democratic Party. It was saying, no, we're not even going to talk to anyone else, basically creating this void. The Democratic Party has left these diamonds on the sand, and Donald Trump has simply said, okay, I'll take them. And that main diamond is unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States. Now, Donald Trump, I'm not saying he offers them anything, but at least he acknowledges their pain. The Democratic Party today, you live in Aspen, right?
I do.
I've been in Aspen enough. Aspen, I lived in Montecito, California. It's one of those upstairs, downstairs
I'm not just
places.
in a bubble.
Okay?
I'm in a snow globe. It's a snow globe.
All right.
It's absolutely insulated.
When I was growing up, the Democratic Party was associated with downstairs. And today, the Democratic Party is too often associated with what goes on upstairs. So Donald Trump he's a shrewd salesman. He knew what to do with that. And all of us who went along with that. So anybody who wasn't over the last year and a half going, wait a minute, why aren't we having a real primary? Why is it that we're buying this narrative spun by the DNC that we don't primary a sitting president? I'm old enough to remember when Eugene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy Sr. primaried the sitting president, Lyndon Johnson. And by doing so, they brought to the fore as a prominent political factor ending the Vietnam War. It's important that we have elections every 4 years, and that's got to include primary elections. This is something like out of the Soviet Union, where, you went to vote, but the party had already determined who your choices would be. So anybody that wasn't complaining over the last year and a half, especially when there was somebody saying, this isn't going to work, and bought into the mocking, the suppression, the throwing off ballots, the derision, the character assassination, I kind of have and you're upset now? You're upset now. So I think we have to go from where we are. We have to congratulate, people who voted for Trump. They won this time. But we have midterm elections every 2 years. So at this point, all low-level emotions, the hatred, the anger. You mentioned the quote from Martin Luther King. You have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. If you just want to get applause from people who already agree with you, you keep shouting and being mean and judgmental. But if you really want this country to change and you really want to mount a loyal opposition and you really want to be part of the solution and moving into a Democratic win in 2026, then wipe that smug anger, entitlement, ask it to be removed from your heart, and let's get busy and stand for a real alternative. And this has got to mean in the primaries. You can't wait till the general, whether it's a congressional race or a presidential race. You've got to get very serious. And I think all of us need to think now of politics as simply an aspect of a well-lived, meaningful life.
When you were out there running for office, did you feel you were face to face with American voters? Did you feel that they were on the same page, that they were ready for something new politically, that they were ready for what you were talking about?
Absolutely. That's what's so heartbreaking about this moment to me. The American people are not the problem. You know, Laura, my campaign was so suppressed, MSNBC, CNN, uh, not only promulgating the narrative that we can't listen to anyone but Joe, also promulgating lies and all of that. I mean, there's a real viciousness there, how they work to get somebody out of the conversation. But when I did talk to people, the answer to your question is absolutely yes. That's why I almost got 500,000 voters. That means the people who heard me voted for me. It wasn't just about me, Laura. It was about the progressive vision of a sustainable future, both in terms of the environment, in terms of justice, in terms of economics, in terms of the care that we must take of one another and of animals and of the earth. That is the only sustainable option for the human race. So absolutely. And this was my truth in 2020, but also my truth again in 2024. The people are ready. This is a country that elected Lincoln twice. Let's not forget that. This is the country that did abolish slavery and did give women the right to vote and did pass civil rights legislation and did establish labor. This country has done some evil things in our past, but we have also self-corrected. And it's time now to course correct. And yes, what I found on the campaign both times was that the American people are not the problem. It's a political system that seeks to manipulate and to engineer the process more than to facilitate the will of the people. And I think that's what every Democratic and Democratic-leaning voter needs to look at, because if that system in the Democratic Party does not change, then we'll have Trumpism for a very, very long time.
I sincerely hope that what the Democratic Party takes away from this quote unquote happening again is that what you just described, that these Democratic Party leaders pushing you out to get the type of person that they want in the front is not going to work for them anymore. That Americans are fed up. And part of me, I will tell you, I didn't vote for the man, but when I saw that he won, I thought, well, at least maybe we're a little bit closer to Democrats figuring out that this isn't going to work, because it doesn't stand for the people.
First of all, I want to acknowledge you for your questioning, because you go right for it. But my response to your last thing is they won't. So let's talk about that if we might. One of the reasons why the Republican Party is often more politically resilient is because their leaders come from the private sector. What does that mean? That means if something's not working on Tuesday, and especially if it's not working by Thursday, you better change it by Saturday, or you could lose your business. Democrats are the opposite. If it's not working on Tuesday, not working on Thursday, even if they lose a business, they don't care. So they are going to fight to the end. Absolutely not. They are even now justifying. They are blaming each other. They're blaming Biden. They're blaming everyone except
Nancy
themselves.
Pelosi. I mean, it could easily be reporting of her in 2016.
Absolutely.
Right now.
So they're not going to, this idea of hoping they're going to get it, they're not going to get it. They don't want to get it. And I said during the campaign quite a few times, there are people in charge here who would rather Trump win than letting someone like me have a real platform.
You are absolutely right. And I think the fact that you have had the courage and the moxie to do what you've done, not once, but twice, is admirable. And I'm going to ask you more questions about that towards the end of our interview, where you get that from. I really am not surprised. You talk about some of your encounters with Jesus. Your most recent book is The Mystic Jesus. So we're going to dive into that now. And I'm thinking the whole time I'm reading it, I'm really not surprised that he chose her as a messenger, because she really has more moxie than most people. So I'm really glad that he did. And I thank you so much for weighing in on all of that here, because I know that your words have meant so much to so many who do feel relatively hopeless and despondent over these last few days. And I know that your words are activating a sense of hope and a sense of empowerment in so many people. So truly, thank you. Before the election results, you were busy promoting your newest book, your 16th book, The Mystic Jesus. And that's what I'm so excited to talk to you about today. The Mystic Jesus tells much of your personal story and your relationship with Jesus, and it is a super fun topic for me because, like Jesus was, I am also Jewish, and we don't really talk about Jesus very much as Jews. You were raised Jewish as well, and through your studies of A Course in Miracles, you discovered Jesus, describing it as, quote, a conversion to a conviction of the heart. Tell us about what drew you to Jesus as you studied A Course in Miracles.
Well, first of all, being raised Jewish, I certainly was never told anything negative about Jesus. I always say Jews don't have a problem with Jesus. We have a problem with Christianity at various times in history, and that's understandable.
And you
But
say
there are
that in your
two,
book as well. You mentioned
yeah,
that.
very, very, very different issues. The Course in Miracles is not a religion. There's nothing here about the conversion of my religion. Students of A Course in Miracles come from all religions and from no religion. If anything, I think it has deepened my sense of connection to my religion, which is Judaism, because it has deepened my connection to God. Jesus, the Mystic Jesus is the title of my book. And this is not, I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Christian scholar. That's not what this book is about. This book is about the experience of Jesus as a student of A Course in Miracles. And A Course in Miracles has been described as a self-study program of spiritual psychotherapy. It is about the relinquishment of a thought system based on fear and the acceptance instead of a thought system based on love. Now, it is based on universal spiritual themes. So the historic Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. There's nothing here to disparage that, undercut that, disrespect that. He is a religious figure within the context of the Christian religion. He is also, however, to the mystics among us, a spiritual force present in human consciousness, every bit as much now as he was 2,000 years ago. You know, within the great religious systems of the world, there are the mystical teachings. In all of them. In Judaism, there's the Kabbalah. In Islam, there is Sufism. So the idea of the mystic or Gnostic tradition within Christendom has always been there. The idea that that it's not about the church or any organized external institution brokering your relationship with God, but rather the idea of what is a concept that is in Judaism as well as Christianity, which is the small, still voice for God that is within our hearts. And the mystic Jesus is one name for that voice. The Course in Miracles does not claim, first of all, no one, whether a religion or anything else, can monopolize the idea of a universal, non-exclusive spiritual force. But also, the Course in Miracles makes it clear he has one name on the door. There are many names on the door. There are many ways into the door. The covenant of Israel is one way that people enter the door. There are many ways that people find this intercessionary power that is from a thought system beyond our own that can move into our hearts and change things on a fundamental level. If you look at Yom Kippur services, you know, it's not like any religion has a monopoly on that thing that can happen. And the Course in Miracles says religion and psychotherapy at their peak are the same thing. So the way I look at it, Laura, we're living at a time on this planet when we're rethinking everything. We're rethinking politics, we're rethinking business, we're rethinking health, and of course we're rethinking religion and spirituality. And there is an openness to universal forces of consciousness, Jesus being one of them, that help us evolve, that help us take that leap beyond a place in consciousness where the humanity is stuck right now, which represents an absolutely unsustainable suicidal trajectory for the human race.
Well, I gathered that as you were writing, that you were communicating that Jesus is one of the many names on the door, as you said. It's one of many languages. I really think of religions in some ways as languages. They're different ways of saying the same thing or getting to the same place. And like
a kaleidoscope, yeah.
Like a kaleidoscope. And like you, I grew up as a Jew in Houston, Texas. We discussed this before. I attended Beth Israel, which is right next to where you went. You're a Beth Yeshurun girl. And at one point I attended a Christian school in Houston, which I probably honestly stood out more, Marianne, for being a brunette in a sea of blondes than I did for being Jewish. But that's another story. But one of the things I still remember is the people around me really wanting to save me. And that even though I was pretty strong in my confidence that I didn't require the kind of saving that they were talking about, you correct the notion that Jesus came to save people from hell. What do you believe? And you talk about this in the book. What do you believe Jesus really came to save people from?
First of all, I want to say something. There's tremendous anti-Semitism on the planet today. And there are very subtle, covert as well as overt ways that people are seeking to undercut the race of people that we represent, not just the religion.
Yes.
And one of them is how subtly we have been persuaded, so many of us, to say things like, I was raised Jewish.
Did I say
you're
I was
Jewish,
raised Jewish?
you're Jewish.
Oh, did I say I was raised
Jewish.
Jewish? I'm totally
No,
Jewish.
you didn't. No, you didn't say it quite that way, but you said, like Marianne, I was raised Jewish. And so I just want to put that out there.
Okay.
Because it's a way of suggesting, well, you were raised that way, but you don't have to be that way now. So I think that's so important. I think
I'm like
that's
the proudest Jew in the entire world. I love being Jewish. But I think maybe when I'm referencing you, I might be saying you were raised Jewish. Like, I don't want to offend you
I
by assigning
am Jewish.
that. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, no,
you're totally right. Yeah.
No, I'm Jewish. And when I first saw the Course in Miracles, because I saw those Christian terms, I was like, well, this is a Christian book, so this is not for me. Now, the thing is, I had read quite a bit of Christian theology in college, studying comparative religion. So I had read St. Augustine, I read St. Thomas of Aquinas, I had read a lot and really loved it. But that was different than my personal life where I saw this book on a table. I picked it up a year later, and it's important to point out that I saw very quickly reading it, as anyone does, this is not the Christian religion. These are Christian terms used in psychotherapeutically oriented ways. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. You were just referencing the word salvation. They wanted to quote unquote save you.
Yes.
The only thing to be saved from is the fear-based thought system that dominates this world. The thing to be saved from is our own sick thinking. The thing to be saved from is our addiction to violence. The thing to be saved from is our almost instinctive temptation to judge, to attack, to defend, as opposed to love, bless, receive, and accept. So the Christ, for instance, there's a term in Judaism called a Shekinah. The Christ mind, most of us are aware of the work of Carl Jung. So Carl Jung said, if you go deep enough into your mind and deep enough into mine, that there's a level of mental images that we all share. The idea of the Christ mind from a mystical perspective means if you go deep enough into your mind and deep enough into mine, we actually share one mind. And that's the metaphysical meaning of the line, there's only one begotten Son. So the traditional Christian says there's only one begotten Son means Jesus was it and no one else. From a metaphysical, mystical perspective, there's only one begotten Son means God created all of us as one. At the deepest level, there's no separation between you and me. We're the spot on the hub of at the hub of the wheel, not our placement on the rim of the wheel. So in issue after issue, including Jesus, the way the Course in Miracles explains these terms is decidedly different than what we are used to when we hear them used in a traditional Christian context.
In your book, you paint a very accurate picture of an argument between two people in the modern world, which really made me laugh because it's so true. And you said that people today, they would have an endless array of terms for what's going on in such disagreements: trauma, victimization, PTSD, narcissism. You say that all of this might be true, but none of these terms or their analyses are going to deliver us from the hell of our own suffering until we make our way to forgiveness, to seeing another person's innocence. How is Jesus and spirituality generally the ingredient that goes beyond psychotherapy to actually help us get to the other side of our problems?
Well, what you just said is very important. The modern psychotherapeutic paradigm has been in certain ways very damaging because it posits the idea that if I analyze the darkness enough, I'll get to the light. So and that applies not only to how we see other people, but how we see ourselves. If I say, oh, well, he's a narcissist, then that gives me an excuse to judge him. Right.
Yes,
as though he's
absolutely.
not over there talking to his therapist about my issues. Right.
And calling me a narcissist at the same time.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
In terms of our own selves, there's something here about this delusion that if I understand where I got my issues, that somehow will take me beyond them. And a lot of us know you can be very sophisticated at understanding what daddy did, what mommy did, what happened when I was in elementary school, whatever. But it's more helpful to know, no matter where you got your issues, they are yours now. So the traditional psychotherapeutic paradigm, which might suggest that if I discuss it enough or if I understand it enough intellectually, that'll get me beyond it, is different. For the spiritual or religious idea, particularly with Jesus, is, dear God, please take this from me. And you see this in AA, this admission of one's character defects. You say, dear God, I am needy, but I'm willing not to be. I get jealous, but I'm willing not to. I sabotage my relationships, but I see my behavioral characteristics that make me do that. I need help. That's where the salvation lies. To know of myself, the wound is too big, the trigger is too big. The Course in Miracles says that Jesus is someone who lived on the earth, but while here, so actualized his divine consciousness that exists within all of us. He says, I don't have anything you don't have. The only difference between us is I don't have anything else. I'm in a state that is potential in you. His having realized that full actualization, so that he is beyond judgment, he's beyond blame, he's beyond all those personality characteristics that block our way. He now has been authorized by God. The role, should we choose it, only if we ask. If we don't ask, it would be a violation of our free will. You can say, Jesus, please help me. I get angry. I blow it with him every time. I say something that pisses him off. I know I do it. It's like some subconscious thing in me. I'm going to ruin this relationship if I don't stop. Dear God, please help me. Now, do you need Jesus to do that? No. From a Course in Miracles perspective, nobody's saying you need Jesus. You can just ask God. What he says in the Course in Miracles, though, or any sense of your higher power, God doesn't have an ego to get upset if the language is in a certain way. He says in the Course in Miracles, you do not have to ask me personally to enter into your thought system. But if you do, there's that much I can do for you. So and if he's your teacher, you know it. If he's not, he's either becomes part of the constellation of that which brings you into closer relationship with your true self, with others and the world, or he doesn't. There's nothing in my book and nothing in the Course in Miracles that would say you should. It's simply saying that this is an available option that does not in any way undercut any other religious perspective that you might have.
Well, I love that you brought up AA, because when I was 20 years old and I discovered who you were, I actually discovered who you were because your quote, your famous quote, "It's our light, not our darkness, that frightens us most," was written on a bookmark inside of a copy of Courage to Change, which is a very famous piece of literature in Al-Anon, which is a much lesser known 12-step recovery for families and friends of alcoholics, which I found my way into when I was 20. I, like you, was going to a psychologist's office in Houston, and he used to write my truths down on little cards and hand them to me. And after about a year or so in therapy with him, he just started writing Al-Anon on the cards and handing them to me. And when I finally arrived in Al-Anon, what I discovered was that I wasn't alone. The first 3 steps of every 12-step program is that we admit that we're powerless, step 1. Step 2 is we come to believe in a higher power. And step 3 is we make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand him. And I think your book gives everyone permission to turn their will and their life over to the care of God as they understand God. And this, to me, even having a religious background, was completely foreign, that God might be somebody who had a photo of me on his refrigerator, that really wanted to take care of me, that loved me and wanted what was best for me. And I remember month after month going to those rooms and showing up and constantly getting this reminder that I wasn't alone, and how I just needed to relearn it every day. It wasn't in my nature to rely on someone who wasn't me. And I look at the world that we live in now, and I look at this concept of self-help. And I think we're in a place specifically in this country, Marianne, where we believe, A, we can heal ourselves by ourselves, and B, that most of the solutions from our problems come from this sort of relentless psychoanalysis and this avoidance of any type of discomfort. I think that trigger warnings are probably appropriate in some cases, but definitely not as many as they're part of right now. I think we're very averse to being uncomfortable. And I love that you present this idea of, hey, you can actually forgive the people that you're angry with. You can find forgiveness, but You can't do it by yourself.
Well, I think everything you just said is absolutely true. But I think sometimes it depends on the degree whether or not you can do it yourself. You know, you and I could have lunch together and I might say I'm angry at somebody and you hear the story. And in some cases, you might say, oh, Marianne, you're bigger than that. Give it up. Come on. Come on. Forgive that. Lighten up. And I would say, thank you, Laura. You're so right. Other times, however, it might be where a situation where the trigger is so great, the wounding is so great, the pain is so great that I do need help.
Yeah.
And the idea here is that the pain is that the help is available. And
absolutely.
That there is a power, what is it they say, a power in us that can do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And the reason AA is so important is because it does introduce into people's minds that this is bigger than you. You know, you can't just decide to get sober. You can't just decide to get over this or that. Sometimes it's all the ego is mental addiction. So alcoholism, drug addiction are simply forms that the ego takes. And I think it's one of the things that's so helpful in understanding all this in terms of recognizing the principles in AA is the idea that the addiction isn't just out to inconvenience you. The ego is out to kill you. The loveless mind is not neutral thought. The loveless mind is proactively into the projection of fear and guilt and destructiveness and suffering, every bit as much as the spiritual mind is into the extension of love, peace, and harmony. And I think that's a large part of where we are right now, Laura. I think even talking about this political result, the days of neutrality are over. If you are not proactively using your mind and your behavior as a conduit for the extension of something that lifts the world up, then that same mental energy, because there's no such thing as neutral thought, is being used to, at the very least, perpetuate a status quo that is itself in a state of decline. I think that's why a lot of people are so shocked by this political moment. I didn't do that. Well, you kind of did. You kind of did. If you weren't part of creating the counterforce, and I think in politics, one of the things I think in the last few days, Laura, there's been a lot of growing up. There's been a lot of waking up and a lot of growing up. And, I've been saying it for a long time. This is not a time for women to act like girls. It's not a time for men to act like boys. This is not a time to think only in terms of our own personal neuroses. There are plenty of hours in the day. You've got to also stand up for what's happening here. And when you stand up for what's happening here, you do realize that at this point in our history, there's something here about making ourselves available on a whole new level to transformation, not only of our lives, but the transformation of our country and the transformation of our world in a way that doesn't have to represent a majority. If it even represents a critical mass, will take us in a new direction and a direction that we need to go if the species is to survive. It's kind of like an AA when you stage an intervention. Most of us have either received a call, made a call, where somebody says to somebody, did you see her the other night? Did you see her drive away with those kids in the back? Did you see him fall down the stairs? Shouldn't we do something? And that means, should we get an interventionist? Because if this continues, they could die. The way we're living on the planet, the Secretary General of the United Nations has said the trajectory of human development at this point is unsustainable for our survival. And we need to collectively stage an intervention.
I think about interventions, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because interventions typically happen when somebody is at rock bottom, even if they don't know it yet. And I have to say, it reminds me a lot of how I felt just a few days ago on November 5th, when I saw those returns rolling in, and I'm thinking, yeah, you know what? I think maybe we didn't know it, but we needed this. I think we needed another, I don't know what it's going to take, but I wasn't going to feel comfortable if we were allowed to believe that we could continue to move forward in the way that we were without any type of repercussion. It's just not working.
And let's be very clear. That's why you need your friends to come in and states that intervention, because the addict will know that and continue to drink or continue to use.
Absolutely.
So we have to get over our magical thinking.
Yes.
When it comes to drug addiction and alcoholism, enough of us have now experienced enough or seen enough that we know that physical survival in such a case is not guaranteed. What we need to understand about our democracy and the life of our species, its survival is not guaranteed either. So when you say we've bottomed out, I don't know, maybe yes, maybe no, because the leadership, the elite leadership of the Democratic Party will not see it that way.
No, they will not. Absolutely. It is not up to them, and they are not going to choose to see it.
Well, it is up to them. Well, wait a minute. It is up to them unless we are very clear and conscious and not willing to go along, because so many people just went along with whatever the DNC said. And people have part of that growing up process right now is maybe we better think for ourselves. Maybe we shouldn't farm out our power. Maybe we shouldn't farm out our political perspicacity.
Marianne, you watched all that. You had a front row seat to all of that. And I will tell you,
I did have I was in the belly of the beast, Laura.
And you're still here. I mean, my husband ran for office a couple of times, and I felt like I didn't have the front row seat you had, but I had more of a citywide front seat. And I was pretty disheartened for a really long time. It was very difficult for me to see that and to see you showing up over and over again. It reminds me of one of my favorite Jewish ideas, and this is really more of a rabbinical and Talmudic interpretation. But it's that in Judaism, we don't speak so much about the afterlife, because what we do here on earth, tikkun olam, repairing the world, is very, very important. And we're meant to give it weight. And we're not supposed to just be sitting here waiting to get to the other side. We're supposed to focus on our work here. And to me, you embody that. And I'll tell you, I've watched you many times, and I wonder where you get that spark that you have to press on. And how do you continue to care when it's quite easy, as we've all seen? And I mean, I've done this how do you continue to care when it's so easy to check out? Where is the balance for you in doing everything you do every day to try to make the world a better place while also having faith in God? Do you ever feel weary, Marianne? Like, are you ever tired?
Well, of course I do. Of course I feel weary as a human being, but I have two answers to your question. First of all, the Talmudic line, that you are not expected to complete the task, but neither are you permitted to abandon it. That's number one. Yes. And number two, like you, I am a Jewish woman from Texas.
Texas.
A Jewish woman from Texas, it's in our genes. No, that will not do. And that will not stand.
100%. You have two of those things going for you. You weren't about to just sit there.
Right, exactly. Three, actually. Woman, Jew, Texas. Stand aside.
You're not about to just sit back. Well, I absolutely love that about you. I think it's really fantastic. Albert, I'm going to go back to your book just a little bit here. Okay. Albert Einstein famously said that the more he studied the stars, the more he believed in a higher power. And personally, I agree fully with Albert, but I do feel like our society is really more in a Stephen Hawking place right now. I love Stephen. I'm super thankful for his contributions to life here on Earth, but he wasn't really very optimistic about our earthly future. He didn't really believe in a higher power. Science actually negated the idea of God more for him. And I love when you talk about how, you talk about in your book how human beings come into the world, and yes, mom and dad have sex, a baby is born, but where do they get their feelings and where do they get their spiritual inclinations? I think about this all the time. How do we get back to a place where we're willing to, yes, understand and study and honor science, but see it as proof of the miraculous as opposed to proof that we're totally on our own, which I think is totally crazy and contributing to a lot of what you've discussed today.
Some people say that there's not proof that he said this, but many people say that one of the lines of Einstein is, the more I know about physics, the more I want to know about metaphysics. And we do know that he had a very spiritual side. He was a Pisces. He was a fascinating human being. I think that his whatever cynicism he had about the human race was because he understood what the atom bomb represented, what nuclear power represented, and he saw that we kicked off the nuclear age, and he knew what that could lead to. He famously said, "I know not with what weapons World War III would be fought, But I can assure you World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. In other words, he realized that if a nuclear war were to begin, it would basically demolish civilization as we know it. So I think that for me, that posits the need for a deep sobriety, a deep seriousness at this moment. I think that's what we are called to. When we were children, we were taught about evolution, and we were taught that if a species begins to demonstrate maladaptive behavior maladaptive for its own survival, that one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to go extinct or it's going to evolve in a different direction. That's what I mean by magical thinking. It's only magical thinking we couldn't go extinct here. So what makes a species evolve into a different direction? The introduction of a mutation. And that mutation, to me, is what Jesus, Buddha, Moses, all the great religious and spiritual systems represent. Really, that there be a mutation in the way we see life, and that we move from a fear-based to a love-based worldview. From a worldview in which we see ourselves as separate from one another to a worldview in which we recognize that at the deepest level we are one another, in which we recognize that what we do to others we literally are doing to ourselves. It might take a little time before we experience that, but that's what time is for. So I think that Einstein being exactly where he was very important, because recognizing what is happening on Earth right now is where we need to be. You can't skip that and say, oh, it'll be okay when we're all in, some afterlife. And by the way, it's interesting what you said, because Jews do believe that there is an afterlife. It's just that our focus needs to be here right now. And that's so important. And I think also, Lauren, I think based on other things that you've said, that you will probably agree with me. A big problem we have is how infantilized we have allowed ourselves to be, not only as citizens, but also in the higher consciousness community. This is a very serious time. It's a very serious time in our country, and it's a very serious time in our world. And in order for us to be death doulas to a world that has to pass away, but in a way that it's a wise and a responsible and a nonviolent passing away of what needs to pass away, in order for us to be birth doulas to the world that is struggling to be born, we are going to have to rise up now. We are going to have to intend and decide and be willing to be strong where we have been weak, to be courageous where we have cowered, to be loving where we have indulged all the negativity and the anger. This is a moment of where it is time to deeply recognize this is not about, well, I don't know, I'm still working on it. No, there's no time. There's no time. You'll work on it a few hours a day, but then we have a country to save, we have a world to save. And so we are being called to actualize our potential spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, psychologically. This is it. This is the moment. And anything less than that, and we will be refusing to participate in the collective rebirthing that is so necessary now. I think that's what we really in our hearts yearn to do. But I think by overemphasizing our woundedness over the last few decades, we have so embellished every little wound that we have not given enough attention to owning our light. Yeah, you've got to own your darkness, got to own your shadow, got to admit it. You also have to own that there's a light within you, in the presence of which anything is possible. You can call that God, you can call it whatever, but it's time to step into that and to support each other in that. I think, Laura, so many of us have gotten used to just having lunch with somebody and somebody says, are you okay? As opposed to, what great thing are you doing and how can I help you?
We don't talk about the things that are going really well in our friendly conversations.
Yeah, we need support groups. We need support groups. Hi, I'm great, feeling good, money, sex, everything is happening.
Yeah, right. taking time to acknowledge that. I mean, even and on a personal level and in terms of our country, I try to tell, my kids are 8, 5, and 2. So the 8 and the 5-year-old, by nature of being in this country, knows so much more about American politics than I knew when I was their age. And so they ask me a lot of questions. I answer as age appropriately as I possibly can. But I try to tell my oldest, who definitely gets more anxious than my other kids, she gets that from me, that every day there are so many things that are going so well that we don't talk about. There are people who are
mothering.
Meeting for the first time, they're falling in love, they're having babies, they're having the best days of their lives. This isn't on the news. And there's so much more of that, in my opinion, that we're not talking about. And most of us, we get into this routine every day of really talking about what's wrong because we have to address it, we have to fix it. But we really ought to only be spending so much time on that. I completely agree with what you're saying, because otherwise, all of these amazing things that are happening, the more we focus on, I really believe the more we focus on those things, the more they grow. And the more we talk about them, the more of them we notice, the more of them we draw to us. And I think that is a really beautiful thing that I think more people, this is another thing, I think more people than we realize know that. I think we just don't talk about it that much.
But we need to not use that as an excuse for not looking at what needs to be done. The Course in Miracles says, look at the crucifixion, but do not dwell on it.
Right.
If you only talk about Moses entering the promised land, but you forget that the whole point was that the Jews had been enslaved in Egypt, or if you only talk about resurrection and don't point out that first there was a crucifixion, then you're actually not in transcendence, you're in denial.
That's very true.
We're in multidimensional. We're multidimensional beings, and we don't want to be imbalanced in either direction. There are times when the heart is breaking. I wrote a book called Tears to Triumph, talking about Buddha and Jesus and Moses in terms of how to handle heartbreak, how to handle that dark night of the soul, and the time to do that. I opened that book with a quote from Rilke: "Let me not squander the hour of my pain." Humans, if we don't tend to our own suffering, we tend to have a diminished attention on the suffering of other people. So I think the point is that, as the Course would say, God's will has never not been done. The direction things are taking is always in the direction of love, but we ourselves have to be the benders of that arc. We ourselves have to be the ones who are willing to repair the world.
And you talk about life being a GPS, and I always talk about, I don't know if I learned that from you, I don't know who told me that first, but that we're constantly recalculating. The destination's the same, but how we get there is going to change based off of the choices that we make, because they do matter. And these moments in our lives that cause us pain, I believe that they're here to teach us something. I believe that from every negative experience, something good can be extracted. We can learn.
But what's very important there is the role of free will. The universe works like a GPS in that anytime you or someone else took a non-loving turn,
you're actually driving.
Well, the GPS will recalibrate, but you don't have to follow the GPS if you don't want to. I mean, that's really important. So the fact that the universe gives you the opportunity to course correct, you still have to take the opportunity. That's the point of free will.
You do. You absolutely
So we can't, this is what I mean about getting out of any magical thinking that would allow us to say, oh, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
Because it won't necessarily be okay. With Germany, it wasn't okay.
It wasn't okay.
Not for a long, long time. A terrible war had to be fought first. The decline of the Roman Empire. I mean, there are enough situations in life where actually it wasn't okay. Huge human suffering occurred before it was okay. And that's what I mean about the need to be very sober about all this at this moment. The world is not going to automatically correct itself. The opportunity to correct is there, but whether or not we take the opportunity is completely up to us.
In your book, you talk about atonement and how for Jews, we atone on Yom Kippur, Catholics atone in confession, alcoholics in an AA meeting. You describe atonement as, quote, the correction of our perception, placed within us by God as an eternal escape route from fear. You say that what the world needs now is atonement. What does that look like? What do you mean by that?
It's not going to be enough to simply argue over what behavioral changes need to be made. Ultimately, the profound fundamental turnaround, U-turn that the human race needs to make is going to come from our recognition of what we have done to the earth, what we've done to each other. The Course in Miracles says we have to take 100% responsibility for our life experience, and that if we don't, we will pay a very high price, and that very high price is that we won't be able to change it. When we recognize what we have done to the earth, what we have done to the oceans, what we have done to the sky, what we've done to the children, what we've done to the animals, what we've done to one another, something will move within us at such a level, and that will then create the fertile ground for enough people to rise up with not only their own psychological and emotional heft, but with enough political possibility also provided to that heft to actually make the external as well as the internal changes that we need to make on the earth. That's why Martin Luther King said, in order to create the beloved community, we need external changes in our circumstances and also internal shifts in our souls. That's why, whether you're running for president or talking about a book about Jesus, some people will go, wait, what? Wait, what? Well, it's both and. I grew up in a generation. We woke up in the morning when I was in college. You wake up in the morning, you read Ram Dass, you read Alan Watts, and that afternoon you go to an anti-Vietnam War protest. Nobody thought that was weird. Nobody was saying, stay in your lane. The human experience doesn't have a lane.
No,
you're
it doesn't.
Out there. No, you're raising your children and your relationship with your husband and your relationship with your community and your professional endeavors. Nobody's asking you to pick a lane. You're
so
a human
glad you said
being.
that. I think people are very afraid to speak up for things that maybe they aren't directly involved with for fear of offending somebody.
Well, that's really that really is an example of what has gone wrong in our society, that we have thought, oh, the DNC knows, the political party knows. This whole idea of a political class. Our Constitution is radically opposed to that.
A political class.
The political class is just another form of aristocracy.
Yeah, it really is.
That's all it is. So, George Washington, as well as John Adams, our second president, warned us about the power of political parties usurping the power of the people. That's what happened in this last Democratic election. And that's what those of us who want to be part of mounting this loyal opposition will attend to over the next 2 years. Right now, it's happening.
It is happening right now, and you're part of it. And Marianne, Lord knows I could talk to you all day. But since we do have to wrap up, I want to tell you, if you're listening, that if you're local here in Aspen, or if you plan to visit in December, you can see Marianne Williamson live at the Aspen Chapel on December 5th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. I will be there with bells on. Coming off the heels of the recent election, Marianne will be speaking on the subject of navigating our way to the future. She will also be signing copies of her new book, The Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love. To purchase tickets, you can go to aspenchapel.org. Marianne, I will never be able to fully articulate the honor, but thank you for coming on the show today and for everything you do.
Well, I'm impressed by you. I think you're really great.
Thank you so much.